The deed felt like a lead weight in his hand. It was supposed to be a symbol of a new beginning, freedom, a life carved out of the wilderness with his own two hands. Instead, as Boone Whitmore stared at the farmhouse, it felt like an anchor dragging him down into the dust. The place was supposed to be empty, abandoned, waiting for him. But three women stood on the porch. They weren't welcoming. They stood like statues carved from granite and fury, their shadows stretching long and sharp in the afternoon sun. One of them, taller than the rest, with arms that looked like they could snap a fence post in two, stepped forward. A smile touched her lips, but it never reached her eyes. Her eyes were chips of ice. "You must be the new owner," she said. Her voice wasn't a question. It was a statement, heavy and final, like the slam of a jailhouse door. Boone felt the hairs on his neck prickle. There was something wrong here. Terribly wrong. He'd ridden for 3 days to get to this god-forsaken plot of land. Poured every last cent he had into the dream the seller, a man named Marcus Vance, had spun for him. Fertile land, a sturdy house, and most importantly, isolation. A clean break from a past he wanted to bury. Now that isolation felt like a cage closing in. The other two women flanked the leader. They were just as tall, just as strong. They watched him with a hungry intensity, like wolves sizing up a lone deer that had wandered too far from the trail. He had to get control of this. Now. "Ladies," Boone started, his voice a low rumble he hoped sounded steady. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He held up the deed, the crisp paper crinkling in his trembling hand. "This is my property, bought and paid for, legal and binding." The tall woman's smile widened, showing teeth that seemed just a little too white, a little too sharp. "Oh, we know exactly who you are, Boone Whitmore." A cold spike of fear shot down his spine. How did she know his name? The sale was supposed to be private, anonymous. "We've been expecting you," she said, and the way his name rolled off her tongue felt like a threat. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something else entirely. The woman to her right, broader in the shoulder, with hair as black as a starless night, spoke next. Her voice was deeper, a low growl that vibrated in Boone's chest. "We've been living here a long time," she said, "keeping the land warm." She put a strange emphasis on the word warm, and a knot of dread tightened in Boone's gut. The third woman, a redhead with a constellation of freckles across her powerful shoulders, let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "The previous owner made certain arrangements with us before he left," she said, her green eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "Arrangements that don't just vanish because of a piece of paper." Boone felt their collective gaze like a physical weight. These weren't just squatters. This was calculated, deliberate. He remembered how eager Marcus Vance had been to close the deal, how he'd barely looked Boone in the eye. He'd been set up. He had walked straight into a trap. "What kind of arrangements?" Boone asked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The tall leader's eyes glittered. She let the silence stretch, twisting the tension until Boone thought he might snap. Then she delivered the line that shattered his world. "The kind that involved you staying," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Permanently." She took a step closer, close enough that he could see the raw power coiled in her muscles. "You're going to pleasure us, Boone," she said, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. "All three of us. That's the arrangement. That's how this works." His world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a proposition. It was a verdict, a sentence. His hand instinctively drifted toward the rifle still holstered on his saddle. He was a dead man if he reached for it. He was a different kind of dead man if he didn't. What in God's name had he ridden into? And why did he have the sinking, horrifying feeling that the deed in his hand was his own death warrant? Boone's hand froze. The cold, hard reality of his situation washed over him. He was 3 days from the nearest town, 3 days from any law. Out here, the only law was who was stronger, who was smarter, who was more ruthless. And looking at the three women on the porch, he knew it wasn't him. This wasn't some crude joke. The confidence radiating from them was absolute. The way they spoke of arrangements with Marcus Vance told him this was a system, a well-oiled machine he had just become a cog in. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," he said, forcing the words through a throat gone dry as dust. But I paid for this land. I'm not leaving. He swung his leg over his horse, dismounting slowly. He kept his movements small, deliberate. He wasn't a threat, not yet. He met the leader's icy gaze and held it. She let out a low chuckle, a sound like stones grinding together. Game? Oh, Boone. This isn't a game. This is business. She gestured to the farmhouse with a sweep of her powerful arm. See, the man who sold you this property? He owed us a debt. And that debt doesn't just go away because he took your money and ran. The redhead stepped forward again, her boots thudding on the wooden porch. Marcus Vance made promises, she spat, his name a curse on her lips. He promised to be our partner, in more ways than one. Her green eyes burned into him. When he got tired of that, he promised us the next owner would take his place. That would be you. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Boone's shock. Marcus Vance. The seller had introduced himself as Mark, a friendly, simple man. It was a lie. All of it. This was a setup from the very beginning. That's not legal, Boone argued, his voice thin. No man can make a promise for another, especially not that kind of promise. The dark-haired woman laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed in the unnerving quiet. You really don't get it, do you? There are no legal rules out here. There's only what we decide. We make the rules. We make our own arrangements. The word arrangements again. It made his skin crawl. This was more than a property dispute. This was a microcosm of civilization, with its own laws, its own twisted form of justice. And he had just been made its newest citizen. The deed is filed, he insisted, his confidence crumbling with every word. It's official. Whatever Vance promised you is his problem, not mine. The leader's smile finally vanished. What replaced it was something terrifying, a look of cold, predatory calculation. Documents don't mean a thing when you're outnumbered, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. They don't mean a thing when no one can hear you scream. She took another step off the porch, closing the distance between them. Up close, she was even more imposing, a giant of a woman built for hard labor and harder fights. Besides, the redhead added, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, we have our own paperwork. She pulled a folded document from a pocket in her trousers. Even from a distance, Boone's heart sank. It looked official. It looked like a contract. Marcus signed agreements, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction, specifically transferring his obligations to any future owner of this property. The pieces slammed into place. It wasn't just a scam. It was an elaborate, legally cushioned trap. Marcus Vance hadn't just sold him a farm. He'd sold him into a life of servitude to these three women. But as the terror threatened to consume him, something else flickered in their eyes. Beneath the intimidation, beneath the cold fury, he saw something else. It was a strange, desperate longing. The way the leader's eyes lingered on his face, the subtle tension in the redhead's stance. There were layers here he couldn't see, depths he couldn't fathom. And that uncertainty, that mystery, was more frightening than any simple threat. What did they really want from him? And what had Marcus Vance truly done to them to make them this desperate, this dangerous? The paper Magdalene held looked so legitimate, it made Boone's blood run cold. He could see the bold signature of Marcus Vance at the bottom. He could see what looked like a notary's seal. His mind was a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. Had he been legally sold into bondage? You're bluffing, he croaked, but the words had no force. No court would uphold a contract like that. The dark-haired woman, Ruth, stepped off the porch, her movements fluid and certain. She circled him slowly, like a predator inspecting its catch. Who said anything about courts? We handle our own justice here. She was right. The law was a distant concept, an abstract idea that had no power in this isolated valley. Here, justice was immediate and personal. My name is Helena, the leader said, her tone suddenly shifting, becoming almost conversational. It was a disorienting change that threw him off balance. This is Ruth, she nodded to the dark-haired woman. And Magdalene. The redhead Magdalene gave a little wave that was somehow both casual and deeply menacing. We've been waiting for you for weeks, Boone, Helena continued. Marcus described you perfectly. He felt a chill crawl up his back. How much did they know? What personal details had that snake Vance shared with them? Had he described Boone's desperation? His desire for a quiet life? Had he painted a target on his back? Whatever he told you, he had no right, Boone said, trying to regain some footing. I bought this land in good faith. The words seemed to strike a chord with Helena. Her expression softened, just for a moment, and he saw a flicker of something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. Good faith, she repeated, the words a ghost on her lips. That's a new one. Marcus wasn't a man of good faith. Not in the end. She studied his face, her gaze so intense it felt like she was peeling back the layers of his soul. You're different from him, quieter. You have a stillness about you. Ruth completed her circle and stopped to his left. Her eyes, he noticed for the first time, were a gentle brown, a stark contrast to her powerful build. Marcus was all charm and empty words at first, she said, her voice softer than before. Talked about partnership, building a future. 3 months later, he was looking for a way out. He used us, Magdalene added, and the raw hurt in her voice was undeniable. It cut through the layers of intimidation and threat. He took our work, our hospitality, our affections. She paused, then corrected herself. He took everything. Then he sold the land we bled for and ran off with your money. The story was finally taking shape. It was a grim, ugly picture. These weren't just predators. They were victims, betrayed and abandoned by the same man who had conned him. They saw him as the consequence of that betrayal, and they were going to make him pay Marcus Vance's debts. So you see, Helena said, stepping so close he could smell the faint, clean scent of lavender soap on her skin. We have a claim here, a real one, not just to this land, but to the life we were promised, the life that was stolen from us. Boone looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the imposing giant. He saw the hard set of her jaw when she spoke of Marcus. He saw the slight tremor in her hand that she tried to conceal. This wasn't just about a contract or a piece of land. This was about shattered hearts and broken trust. And then he saw something else, something that made his own heart stumble in his chest. The way she was looking at him now, it wasn't just about fulfilling an obligation. There was a flicker of something else in her gaze, a spark of genuine, undeniable interest. And the most terrifying part, he felt it too, a strange, dangerous pull toward this woman who had just threatened to enslave him. His mind screamed at him to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there. But his body was frozen, caught in the magnetic field of her presence. The air crackled with unspoken tension. He was trapped between a rational fear for his life and an irrational, inexplicable fascination with these three dangerous, broken women. There was something captivating about Helena's raw power, Ruth's quiet strength, and Madeleine's fiery spirit. He had to see the contract. He had to know what he was up against. Show it to me, Boone said, his own voice surprising him with its steadiness. If I'm bound by it, I have a right to read the words that sealed my fate. Magdalene stepped forward and unfolded the document. It was a single sheet of thick, expensive-looking paper. The ink was dark and official. He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers. A jolt, like lightning, shot up his arm. He forced himself to focus on the text. His eyes scanned the carefully worded clauses, and his confusion only deepened. This is a partnership agreement, he said, looking up at Helena. His mind struggled to process the legal jargon. It talked about farming operations, profit sharing, and then he saw it. A clause so strange, so out of place, that it made his breath catch in his throat. It stipulated terms for mutual support, companionship, and the fulfillment of all domestic and personal obligations for all parties involved. It was a slave contract, wrapped in the language of a business deal. Marcus was clever, Ruth said, moving to stand beside him. She was so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. She smelled of fresh-baked bread and rich earth. He made business sound like romance, and romance sound like business. He twisted everything. Helena watched his face, gauging his reaction. We made this land profitable, she said, her voice filled with a pride that was hard-earned. We built the irrigation. We tilled the soil. We opened trade routes. Marcus reaped the benefits of our labor for a year. And when he got bored, Magdalene added, her voice sharp with anger, he found a sucker, took the money, and left us with a piece of paper that says his responsibilities are now yours. Boone stared at the signature. Marcus Vance. The man had sold him down the river with a flick of his wrist. This contract wouldn't hold up, Boone said, but his voice was weak. He knew it didn't matter. I didn't sign it. I'm not responsible for his promises. Helena's expression changed. The hard mask she wore cracked, and for a second, he saw the raw pain beneath. You're right, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Legally, you probably aren't. But morally, we poured our blood and tears into this place. We have nowhere else to go. This is all we have left. The admission hung in the air, a raw, desperate plea. It changed everything. These weren't captors. They were prisoners, chained to this land by the betrayal of one man. They weren't trying to trap him. They were trying to survive. Ruth stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. We're not asking you to be Marcus. We're asking you to consider that we could build something here, something better, together. Boone looked at them. Helena, whose strength was a shield for a deep and aching loneliness. Ruth, whose quiet confidence couldn't hide the flicker of hope in her eyes. Madeline, whose fierce anger was a wall built around a heart that had been shattered. He was supposed to be their prisoner, their property, but the question that formed on his lips was not that of a captive. What exactly, Boone asked, the words feeling heavy and momentous, are you proposing? He knew as he said it that he was stepping over a line. He was walking off the edge of the world he knew and into something wild, unknown, and terrifying. The three women exchanged a look. A silent conversation passed between them. His answer, he realized, wouldn't just decide his future. It would decide theirs too. Whatever happened next, his simple life was over. Helena stepped forward, her presence filling the space between them. The threat was gone, replaced by a heavy, fragile hope. We're proposing a real partnership, she said, and her voice was different now, warmer, deeper. Not the lie Marcus sold us, something real. We work the land together, we share the profits. 4 ways, not 3. She paused, her blue eyes locking with his. And we share our lives. The words hung in the dusty air. A real partnership. It was an insane idea. He was a stranger, a man they had minutes ago threatened to enslave. But he saw past the threat now. He saw their desperation. They weren't just offering him a place in their business. They were offering him a place in their lives, in their home, in their beds. It was a gamble born of having no other cards to play. The 3 of you, Boone said slowly, carefully, you've been together since he left? It was a bold question, but he had to know. He had to understand the dynamic he was being asked to join. Ruth was the one who answered. A faint blush rose on her cheeks, a surprising show of vulnerability from the powerfully built woman. We found comfort in each other, she said, her voice soft. He abandoned us, left us for dead. We had to survive. It started as that, survival, but it became more. Her honesty was a gut punch. It stripped away all his preconceived notions. Magdalene moved to stand with her sisters, a united front. But it wasn't a front of intimidation anymore. It was one of solidarity. We know how this sounds, she said, her green eyes fixed on him. 3 women on their own, asking a stranger to join them. People in town would call us witches, or worse. But this isn't town, she continued, a fierce pride in her voice. Out here, you make your own family. You make your own rules, or you die. His mind was reeling. He'd come here for solitude, to escape the complexities of other people. And now he was being offered the most complex situation imaginable. His rational mind was screaming at him. Danger, trap, insanity. But another part of him, a deeper, lonelier part, was listening. It was a part he'd kept buried for years, a part that yearned for connection, for belonging, for a home. The physical part, Boone said, his voice raspy. He had to ask. He had to know what they expected. What would that mean? Helena's smile returned, and this time it was real. It transformed her face, softening the hard lines and lighting up her eyes. It would mean whatever feels right, she said simply. To all of us. No demands. No pressure. Not like with him. Just exploring what happens between us, if anything happens. The sincerity in her voice was absolute. This wasn't about fulfilling the twisted terms of Marcus's contract. This was about creating something new. Something based on choice, not coercion. And if it doesn't work out? Boone asked, though he could feel his defenses crumbling like a sandcastle against the tide. He was drawn to them, to Helena's fierce protectiveness, to Ruth's gentle soul, to Magdalene's untamed spirit. Then we figure it out, Ruth said, her voice calm and reasonable. But Boone, we've been watching you since you rode in. The way you stood your ground. The way you looked us in the eye, even when you were scared. We think it could work. We hope it will. They had been watching him, judging him, just as he had been judging them. It wasn't a one-sided trap. It was an offer. A strange, terrifying, and unbelievably tempting offer. Could he do it? Could he abandon the simple life he'd planned and step into this wild, unpredictable future? The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A decision had to be made. His practical side took over, a last bastion of his old life. I need to see the farm, Boone said, the words a compromise between his fear and his curiosity. If we're talking partnership, I need to see what I'm partnering in. A wave of relief washed over Helena's face. She tried to hide it, but he saw it. Of course, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ruth, show him the irrigation. The pride in her voice as she spoke of Ruth's work was genuine. There was real affection here, a real bond. As Ruth led him away from the house, he felt the weight of Helena's and Magdalene's eyes on his back. This wasn't just a tour of the property, it was a test. Ruth walked him toward the fields, and Boone's skepticism began to dissolve. The irrigation system wasn't just functional, it was a work of art. A series of precisely dug channels diverted water from a distant spring, feeding a network of sprawling fields and garden plots. The crops, corn, beans, squash, were healthy and abundant. This was the work of someone who understood the land, who respected the flow of water and the cycle of the seasons. It took months, Ruth explained, her hands moving as she spoke, sketching the engineering challenges in the air. We had to blast through rock here, build up a retaining wall there. Marcus took the credit whenever traders came by, but we dug every inch of it ourselves. The bitterness in her tone was sharp, but it was overshadowed by the fierce pride she took in her work. This was her creation. Madeline met them by the livestock pens. The cattle were fat and content, the chickens plump and noisy in a well-maintained coop. We have trade agreements with 3 different settlements, Magdalene said, and she began rattling off numbers and figures that made Boone's head spin. She spoke of profit margins, seasonal demand, supply chains. She wasn't just a farmhand. She was a businesswoman, a sharp one. The operation isn't just surviving, she said, a challenging glint in her eye. It's thriving. No thanks to him. Boone was more than impressed. He was stunned. These women hadn't just been maintaining the farm. They had transformed it. They had built a small, prosperous empire in the middle of nowhere. It was a testament to their intelligence, their strength, and their incredible resilience. They returned to the farmhouse as dusk settled over the valley. The house has 4 bedrooms, Helena said as she held the door open for him. We've been using 3. We always hoped. She left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. The inside of the house was as impressive as the outside. It was clean, warm, and comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, surrounded by handmade furniture. The kitchen was spacious and well-stocked. There was evidence of their care and hard work everywhere he looked. This wasn't just a building, it was a home they had poured their souls into. They sat in the main room, the silence thick with unspoken questions. You don't have to decide tonight, Ruth said gently, sensing his turmoil. This is a lot to take in. But as she spoke, Boone realized he had already decided. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But it was being pushed aside by something else. a powerful magnetic pull. It wasn't just physical attraction, though he couldn't deny the way his body responded to them, the way Helena's presence commanded the room, the way Ruth's quiet smile seemed to see right through him, the way Magdalene's fiery energy made the air crackle. It was more than that. It was the pull of belonging, of purpose. He had come here seeking an escape from the world. But these women weren't an escape. They were a world unto themselves, a world they had built with their own hands, and they were inviting him in. The risks were immense, but the reward was a life that meant something, a life of connection, of shared struggle, and shared triumph. What happens next? Boone asked, and the question was an answer. All three women smiled. It was a shared, silent moment of understanding. The future was a vast, terrifying unknown. But for the first time in a very long time, Boone Whitmore didn't feel like he was facing it alone. That night they ate dinner together. The tension of the afternoon had been replaced by a cautious curiosity. They talked about the farm, about the challenges of life on the frontier. Boone found himself relaxing, talking more than he had in years. He watched the easy way they moved around each other, a dance of long-practiced partnership. As they were clearing the plates, Helena's expression grew serious. "There's something else," she said, and her tone silenced the room. "Something you need to know." Boone set down the plate he was drying. "Marcus didn't just leave us with broken promises," she said, her voice low and grim. "He left us with his debts." The words landed like stones in the quiet kitchen. "What kind of debts?" Boone asked, his mind snapping back to business. The romantic, complicated fantasy of the last few hours evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of numbers. Madeline retrieved a heavy ledger from a drawer and placed it on the table with a thud. She opened it, her face a mask of grim resolve. Supplies he bought on credit, tools we never saw, seed that was never planted. He used our good name with the traders in the territories, racked up enormous bills, and then vanished. Boone looked at the columns of numbers. His heart sank. The figures were staggering. "How much?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Enough to ruin us," Ruth said quietly. "The traders have been patient. They know we're good for it, but their patience is running out. We have a month, maybe less. Then they'll come to collect. They'll take the farm, the livestock, everything." This was the final piece of the puzzle. Their desperation wasn't just about loneliness or a broken contract. It was about survival. They were on the verge of losing everything they had bled for. But there was another name in the ledger, one with a single massive number next to it, a name that was written in a different, shakier hand. Silas Croft. "Who is Silas Croft?" Boone asked. The women exchanged a dark look. "He's not a trader," Helena said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's a moneylender. A man who deals with people who can't get credit anywhere else. Marcus went to him when the traders cut him off. His interest rates are a death sentence," Magdalene added, tracing the name with a trembling finger. "And his methods of collection are worse. He doesn't take your farm, Boone. He takes parts of you. Then he takes your life." Now he understood. The threat wasn't just financial. It was existential. They were trapped between the legitimate anger of the traders and the predatory evil of this Silas Croft. They could have hidden this from him. They could have waited until he was committed, until he was in too deep to get out. But they hadn't. They were laying all their cards on the table, no matter how ugly. "Marcus really twisted the knife," Boone said, a cold fury rising within him. He felt a surge of protectiveness for these women, a feeling that startled him with its intensity. He looked back at the numbers. They were bad, very bad, but not impossible. He had his own money, the capital from selling his old life. He'd intended to use it for his own livestock, his own supplies. "I can cover this," he said, the words coming out before he had fully processed them. He looked up and saw three faces staring at him in stunned silence. "I have the funds from my own sale," he continued, his mind racing, calculating. "It'll be enough. Enough to clear the ledgers with the traders, and enough to pay off this Silas." Helena's composure, the iron will that had held her together for months, finally broke. Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her face. She didn't make a sound. Ruth reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was strong, her palm calloused from work, but her touch was trembling with gratitude. Magdalene just stared, her green eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, fierce loyalty that was more powerful than any words. "But I have conditions," Boone said, his voice firm. He had to take control. He had to make this a real partnership, not an act of charity. "If we do this, we do it right. We draw up new papers, a legal partnership, 4 equal shares, clear duties, clear decision-making processes." He met each of their gazes. "And the other part, the personal part, we let that happen naturally if it happens. No expectations, no pressure. We build the business first. We build trust. The rest will follow if it's meant to." Helena wiped her tears, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. It was the same smile he'd seen earlier, but this time it was stronger, brighter. "That's all we ever wanted, Boone," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A real partner, an equal." That night they didn't just talk. They planned. They strategized. They became a team. And Boone Whitmore, the man who had ridden into this valley seeking solitude, realized he had found something infinitely better. He had found a family. A strange, broken, and beautiful family worth fighting for. The worst day of his life had just become the first day of his real life, and the first order of business was dealing with a man named Silas Croft. The next 2 weeks were a blur of frantic activity. Boone rode for 6 days straight, a grueling journey to the Territorial Bank to liquidate his assets. Every mile he felt the weight of his decision. He was gambling his entire future on 3 women he barely knew, on a farm teetering on the edge of ruin. It was the most reckless thing he had ever done. It was also the most right. He returned with saddlebags heavy with cash and a new, legally binding partnership agreement drawn up by the most reputable lawyer he could find. An agreement that named Helena, Ruth, Magdalene, and himself as equal partners in the Whitmore Ridge Farming Cooperative. When he presented it to them, they read it in silence, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. For the first time, their future was secured not by a lie, but by a legally binding promise. Then came the hard part, paying the debts. They decided to deal with Silas Croft first. His was the debt that kept them awake at night, the shadow that hung over their every conversation. They rode together, all 4 of them, to Croft's settlement, a grimy, lawless outpost 2 days' ride north. Croft wasn't a moneylender who worked from an office. He worked from the back room of the dirtiest saloon Boone had ever seen. He was a small, rat-like man with dead eyes and a smile that never touched them. He looked at the 4 of them, his gaze lingering on the women with a greasy familiarity that made Boone's blood boil. "Well, well," Croft sneered. "Marcus Vance's hens have come home to roost, and brought a new rooster with them. Did Marcus sell you to this one too?" Helena stepped forward, her height and presence dwarfing the smaller man. "We're here to settle Vance's account." Croft laughed, a wheezing, unpleasant sound. "Are you now? The interest has compounded, you know. It's a hefty sum." Boone dropped a heavy canvas bag on the table. It landed with a solid, satisfying thud. "Count it," Boone said, his voice flat and cold. "It's all there. Principal and your exorbitant interest. We're done with you." Croft's eyes widened at the sight of the money. He greedily opened the bag and began counting, his dirty fingers flying over the bills. As he counted, his dismissive smirk slowly faded, replaced by a look of grudging respect. It was all there, every last dollar. He looked up at Boone, his dead eyes searching. "You're a fool," Croft said, "wasting good money on these 3. Boone leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the grimy table. "These 3, he said, his voice a low growl, "are my partners. Their debt was my debt. Now it's paid. If you or any of your men ever set foot on our land again, you'll be carried off it. Do you understand me?" For the first time, a flicker of fear appeared in Silas Croft's eyes. He saw the unity. He saw the strength. He nodded, a quick, jerky motion. They walked out of that saloon with their heads held high. The shadow of Silas Croft was gone. They were free. The journey back was different, lighter. They talked. They laughed. A massive weight had been lifted from their shoulders. They spent the next week riding a circuit to the various traders, paying off every last cent Marcus owed. With each settled account, they reclaimed their good name, their reputation. They weren't just Marcus's victims anymore. They were the proprietors of the co-op, shrewd, honorable business people. With the debts cleared, the real work began. And it was in the work that they truly became a unit. Boone's capital, what was left of it, was an injection of life into the farm. They bought a new bull, a stronger breed that would improve their herd. They invested in better tools, more seed. They expanded the irrigation system under Ruth's brilliant direction, opening up another 10 acres for cultivation. Magdalene, freed from the stress of the debt, proved to be an even more formidable negotiator than Boone had realized. She secured new, more profitable contracts for their grain and cattle, playing settlements off one another until she got the best possible price. Helena was the heart of the operation, the leader who saw the big picture. She directed their daily efforts, her strategic mind anticipating problems before they arose. She and Boone spent long evenings poring over the ledgers, planning for the future, their minds working in perfect sync. The personal side of things developed slowly, organically, just as Boone had hoped. It wasn't a sudden dramatic event. It was 1,000 small moments. It was the way Ruth would bring him a cup of cool water in the field, her hand brushing his, a silent acknowledgement of their shared labor. It was the night he and Magdalene stayed up late fixing a broken wagon wheel, their witty banter under the stars turning into a deep conversation about their past, their hurts, their dreams. It was the quiet respect that grew between him and Helena, a bond forged in mutual admiration and a shared vision for the future they were building. There was no single moment where their partnership crossed the line into something more. It was a gradual erosion of boundaries, a slow, natural intertwining of their lives. One evening after a long day of harvesting, they were all sitting by the fire, exhausted but satisfied. A comfortable silence settled over them. Ruth, sitting beside him, leaned her head on his shoulder. It was a simple, trusting gesture. Boone put his arm around her, and it felt as natural as breathing. Across the fire, Helena watched them, and there was no jealousy in her eyes, only a soft, warm smile. Madeline, too, looked on with an expression of peaceful contentment. In that moment, Boone understood. This was it. This was family. It wasn't defined by blood or by law, but by choice, by shared struggle, shared sacrifice, and a shared fierce love for the life they were building together. They had created their own rules, their own world, and in it they had found a kind of peace, a kind of happiness that none of them had ever thought possible. 3 months passed, then 6, a year. The farm wasn't just thriving, it was a regional powerhouse. The Whitmore Ridge Farming Cooperative was known throughout the territories for its quality goods and its owners' unwavering integrity. Traders sought them out, offering premium prices for their cattle and grain. They expanded the farmhouse, adding a new wing with a proper office for Magdalene and a large, comfortable sitting room where they could all relax together at the end of the day. They built a new barn, bigger and sturdier than the old one. Every new plank, every new nail was a testament to their shared success. Their relationship had settled into a beautiful, complex rhythm. It was a life of 4 partners in every sense of the word. There were moments of jealousy, of misunderstanding. They were 4 strong-willed people building a life that had no blueprint. They had to navigate their feelings with honesty and patience. They had arguments, but they learned to resolve them, to listen, to compromise. Their love was not a single, simple thing. It was a complex tapestry woven from 4 different threads. With Helena, Boone found a partnership of the mind. She was his intellectual equal, his strategist, his confidant. Their connection was built on a foundation of deep, abiding respect that often blossomed into a fierce, passionate intimacy. With Ruth, he found a partnership of the soul. She was the calm in his storm, the gentle wisdom that soothed his anxieties. Theirs was a quiet, tender love, expressed in shared silences, knowing glances, and a deep, intuitive understanding of one another. With Magdalene, he found a partnership of the spirit. She challenged him, pushed him, made him laugh. Her fiery passion brought a spark and an unpredictability to his life that he hadn't known he was missing. Theirs was a love full of fire and laughter, a whirlwind of emotion that left him feeling more alive than ever before. And the love the three women shared for each other only deepened. His presence had not fractured their bond. It had reinforced it, giving it a new stable center to revolve around. He had never been happier. The lonely man who had sought isolation had found a richness of connection he could never have imagined. One cool autumn evening, they were all gathered on the expanded porch, watching the sun set over the fields they had built together. The view was breathtaking, a patchwork of gold and green, a testament to their hard work and their unlikely union. "Any regrets?" Helena asked, her voice soft in the twilight. She was leaning against his side, her head on his shoulder. Ruth was on his other side, her hand resting comfortably on his leg, while Madeleine sat across from them, her feet propped up on the railing. Boone looked at the faces of these three incredible women, the women who had threatened him, tested him, and ultimately saved him from a life of quiet desperation. The conventional world he had left behind seemed like a pale, colorless dream compared to the vibrant reality they had created. "Only one," he said. Three pairs of eyes turned to him, surprised. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile full of a happiness so profound it almost hurt. "I regret that it took a lying, cheating coward like Marcus Vance to bring us all together," he said. "Think of all the time we wasted." Their laughter, rich and full and genuine, echoed across the valley. It was the sound of four people who were exactly where they were supposed to be. The sound of a family. The sound of home. In a world that demanded everyone fit into a neat little box, they had built a life that defied definition. And in that defiance, they had found everything that truly mattered. If you enjoyed this story of survival, betrayal, and unexpected love, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next adventure. And if you have a story about someone who found family in the most unlikely of places, share it with us in the comments below. We read every single one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.